Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, March 27th, 2025. There's carnage in Canada. We'll get back to that in just a second. But I want to remind everybody I'm getting quite mixed signals from the weather reports. Now we're supposed to have severe weather and now we're not. So I'm going to go ahead with the vid chat tomorrow. But I want everybody to be alerted to the fact that I will probably start early. And by early, I mean somewhere between 12:30 and 1 o'clock. What they're saying now is that weather might be moving in late afternoon, early evening. So I want to get the vid chat up and recorded and out of the way. I had a bad day today. I got up and locked myself out. Had to bust the glass on my storm door, then run to the Lowe's and get a new door handle for the storm door, and just all sorts of mess. So I'm getting started with the news and views rather late today. Anyway, as I say, there's carnage in Canada, and I have a couple of friends, actually members of the website, that live in Canada. And all of them are either in Saskatchewan or Alberta. And I'm increasingly getting the impression from them, that is to say from Canadians that are following their politics, national politics, closely, that those two provinces in particular are very productive provinces. And they're tired of supporting the welfare economy for the rest of the country. And indeed, some of my friends in those provinces are telling me they would be entirely happy to leave the Canadian Union to join the United States. I keep telling them, you are underestimating dramatically how kooky and bad things are here. I know they're kooky and bad in Ottawa, but Ottawa is learning the lessons from Swampington, D.C., let me assure you. So, anyway, I got an article from one of them today. We'll just call this individual RP. And the article concerns a speech that was given in the Alberta provincial legislature by a Alberta Premier, Danielle Smith. And the op-ed here is rather interesting because it includes one line, just one line, that has me wondering if we're going to be seeing a rather different kind of tariff war in the future. We'll get back to that one line in a minute. This article is an op-ed piece titled Hard Truths from Danielle Smith as she scorches Liberals and the NDP. Now, the NDP is the New Democratic Party. This was a party, I believe, that was founded in the early 1960s. I'm not certain of that. So you might want to check me on that. I'm very unfamiliar with Canadian politics, so cut me slack, guys. I'm trying to bring myself up to speed. But what she is doing is scorching the party leadership, and that gives the author of this article, Murray Little, the opportunity and occasion to do his own questions. And he's questioning the new leader of the Liberal Party, Mr. Carnage, who everyone that has been writing to me about Canadian politics is nicknaming Mr. Carnage, okay? And I want to read what Mr. Little says here because you'll get the implication of Mr. Carnage being just another globalist who does not care one whit for his country. His country is there to make him lots of money. So this is about midway down through the article. It was with delight that I listened to our Premier Danielle Smith give a stem winder of a speech in which she seemed to agree with my thinking. She rhetorically dismantled our legislative seat-challenged leader of the opposition, snitchline Nenshi. She also exposed the moral nudity of our citizen of the world Prime Minister. She didn't ask the question, but I will. Where does Mr. Carney's allegiance rest? In New York City, the city to which he recently transferred his former company, to London, from which, according to former British Prime Minister Liz Truss, he nearly destroyed the British economy, to Dublin, which has become a haven to protect assets, to Davos, from which stage he can preen and offer me the chance to happily own nothing. Surely not to Canada. As our Premier pointed out, Mr. Carney has done more to destroy Canada than to protect it. I think I gained the full measure of Carney the man when on Thursday afternoon he told our Premier that he would not support emission production caps, and then didn't correct a statement in the evening that said he would support such caps, and then gave full-throated support to such caps on the following day. In polite circles, this is called prevarication. This week he said he is going to reduce my taxes. In which universe would I believe him, given his loose relationship with the truth? One of the remarkable things about Smith's speech was the vivid red outfit that she wore. Some might have called it a power move, but I was reminded of the little girl in the red dress in the movie Schindler's List. Without stretching the metaphor too far, it is fair to say that our Premier was so emphatic in her speech today because she is tired of being vilified for making personal sacrifices by two men whose apparent sense of entitlement allows them to disparage with impunity the one person who stoutly defends Alberta. Now, this article begins by this gentleman says, I've argued of late that my patriotic allegiance has shifted almost entirely from Canada to Alberta. In other words, what he's giving voice to is something that many down here in the United States are giving voice to. We've had it with the federal government, and we are much more sympathetic with our local, regional, and state governments. And this is being echoed in Canada. Then in this article there comes an interesting line, and all of what I've just said is background to this line, because it gives me the high-octane speculation that there is something afoot, not only in this country, as increasingly states are passing their own sound money, constitutional money, specie money resolutions and starting bullion depositories and so on. Now, I've gone on record as saying that these movements have to be viewed with some caution. They could be genuine movements on the part of states anticipating a collapse of the federal government and putting into place a parallel infrastructure so that they can conduct commerce and trade, not only overseas but with each other. That's a good thing. The bad thing that I've been cautioning people is that many of these states are opting for, quote-unquote, an electronic transference of the so-called specie money that they're recognizing. In other words, it's a tricky way of moving you into a cashless economy. In other words, it's a trap. If they are not willing, by law, to require and recognize physical media of exchange in all transactions, then it's a trap. Similarly, in Canada, we have these movements, which seem to be growing, of dissent and disgust with their federal government, particularly in Alberta and Saskatchewan, with the rest of the country going sharply to the left. In the speech, Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, according to this article, says this, quote, according to her speech, Smith is off to Washington to keep pressure on the Trump team to minimize the tariff impacts on Albertans, unquote. And then in the very next paragraph, we get this. She might even suggest that the tariffs be minimized until such time as Canadians have chosen a champion to do tariff battle with the Americans. Such a position is traitorous only to those too lazy, stupid, or compromised to go and do likewise, unquote. Now, I find this very interesting because one of the things I've been pointing about the American secessionist movements, we've got secession movements in California, in Oregon, and so on and so forth, of counties that are just fed up with the liberal lunacy of their state governments and want out. And unfortunately, the problem is we have watched a federal government that's been taken over by lunacy. And by the way, the lunacy in some respects is continuing under the current administration, although they're keeping you carefully distracted from some of that lunacy. And the lunacy, again, I think, involves all of this business of sovereign wealth funds in the form of cryptocurrencies, which they're going to be using to buy up hard assets. So in other words, it's an old pump and dump. We're going to take and steal your hard assets and give you electronic computer blips. What I've been advocating and arguing will inevitably happen in the United States with all of these bullion depository and so on, all of these sound money resolutions, is that eventually those states passing these laws will then get together and form some sort of regional compacts with each other. And lo and behold, in this article, we have the Premier of Alberta suggesting a very similar thing. In other words, what she's saying to the United States and to the Trump administration is, okay, look, we're not responsible for the lunacy coming out of Ottawa, out of our federal government. So cut us some slack for goods and services that you import from Alberta. And by the same token, cut us some slack on things that we import from you. She's opting for a regional sort of compact that bypasses her federal government. And I suspect that we're going to see much more of this type of thing because, let's face it, the big national governments, Westminster, Swampington, D.C., Ottawa, Berlin, are increasingly out of touch with their people. Just look at the results of the German election and the fact that they kick out the very coalition that Merz wants to put back into power. So while they continue to ignore their populations, I strongly suspect that what you're going to see are state and regional governments continually and increasingly pursuing independent policies of their federal governments. We saw this begin, actually, in Italy and Germany in about, I'd say from about 2012 to 2015, as the sanctions regime in Europe was cutting and crippling European business, particularly in Italian agricultural exports to Russia and German exports to Russia. So what happened? Well, a bunch of provincial and state leaders in those two countries and business leaders went off on their own, bypassed their federal governments entirely, and flew to Moscow to see what they could do to keep some sort of trade and flow going. So we're going to see more and more of that increasingly, I suspect. And what it also betokens is that the federal governments, the big federal colossus, Canada is a very large country geographically. So these gigantic federal associations are increasingly weak because people are trying to find ways around them. They just don't trust them anymore. So my advice, if you're Mr. Carnage, if you're in Ottawa, and for that matter, Swampington, D.C., pull the thumb out. Because if you think that you have mandates just because of the way the last elections ran, people want action. And they're not going to stop until they get it. And if that means redrawing the boundaries on a map, I strongly suspect that we're just at the beginning of that. If you stop and think what's going on worldwide, everybody is wanting to redraw those borders. This is true in the Ukraine and so on. This is true in Gaza. This is true in this country. It's true in Canada. So we're in major upheaval. This is my point. And the upheaval, I don't think, is going to end in our lifetime. We're in a major period of transition. I am saying be very alert to the movements politically and culturally and financially in your countries, because they could change in a very dramatic fashion very quickly. And be on the lookout for the flim-flam snake oil sovereign wealth fund in the form of cryptocurrencies and electronic transfer schemes if your state is considering recognizing specie money. It's a trap without actual physical media of exchange that is mandated and approved by law in all transactions. So that's it. Don't forget, our vid chat will probably start early tomorrow due to the possibility of storms. I'm sorry I can't nail it down any more than that for you, but at least we're going to try and have our vid chat. So please make sure to get all of your questions and comments in by no later than 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time. And we'll see you on the flip side, everybody. Bye-bye, and God bless.